Welcome to the J-Boy Show, hosted by Jake Crane, the fastest growing sports show in the nation.
I'm Coach Hugh Freeze.
This is Super Bowl champion Brandon Graham.
Hey, this is DJ Shockley, and you're watching.
And thanks for watching the J-Boy Show.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us again on another edition of the J-Boy Show. Excited to welcome producer for the SEC channel on SiriusXM, Frank Fowler. Going to get him on here, talk a ton of SEC football. But first, I do got to give a shout out to our partners at betonline.ag. Head over there today. The sign-up bonuses are awesome, whether it's Major League Baseball, NBA playoff, anything they got going, anything in the sports world where there's going to be some numbers on, they're going to have it. That's betonline.ag. Head over there today and tell them that J-Boy sent you. My monologue today is one and looking forward to the season and looking at these week one matchups. And I've had a lot of people on social media email asking me, Georgia fans specifically, do I think the week one matchup against Clemson and Charlotte is make or break for Georgia's season and their ability to make the playoff? And there's a couple ways to look at it. If you look at it from Clemson's angle, with the way the ACC is, I don't think they're going to have a problem running through that, getting in the conference championship game. So it's really not make or break for them. But if you look at Georgia, and you can never look ahead, and I understand that, but from a fan's perspective, Clemson and most likely Alabama in the SEC championship game. If you lose the Clemson game, do you have to beat Alabama in the SEC championship game to get into the playoff? Since it's still 4, I think yes. I think Oklahoma's going to have a ton of success in the Big 12. Ohio State's going to do their thing. Alabama's probably going to be there, and you never know the unknowns. With Notre Dame and all this, you never know. So I think if you're under the auspices of if this is a make or break game, I think it is. And I got Georgia win the national championship. If Georgia wins this game, they can still afford a loss to Alabama in the SEC championship, or if they stumble along the way, can still have a chance to beat Alabama and get into the playoff. But if you lose this one, that SEC championship game, and again, you can't really see the future, but it almost becomes must win. And if you look at a lot of lines right now, you got Clemson at -3. I've seen Clemson at -4 in some. I'm taking Georgia all day. I think Georgia's going to win the game. But there is some concern, and I think Georgia fans are right to worry that if they lose this game, regardless if it's by 1 point or 10 points, you cannot stumble during the regular season, whether it's Florida, whoever, doesn't matter. You cannot afford to stumble, and then you have to beat what is most likely going to beat Alabama in an SEC championship game. So for the people that are nervous or worried about Georgia being out of it after the first week, you're not out of it. But if you lose that first game, with all the hype and all the accolades and all the pressure and all this stuff that we know goes along with Georgia right now, with where they are in the pecking order and what Kirby has built, you could be facing a big problem. And we all know what Saban's assistants' records are against him, and we know how Georgia's been up at halftime and this, that, and the other. Now, I do think they have the guys to do it. We're just going to have to see. So is week one make or break for Georgia? A lot of it is. I don't think you can outright say that they're going to be out of it by any stretch of the imagination if they lose. But it'd make it a whole hell of a lot easier and increase the chances a whole hell of a lot if they're able to get past Clemson, because that's going to be a huge win when it comes down to it. Even if they do lose to what's most likely going to be Alabama in the SEC championship game, they should still be able to get in there. That's my monologue for today. Let's get Frank Fowler in here, and let's help you win the water cooler. All right, let's get to the interview portion of today's show. Excited to bring in producer for SiriusXM SEC Radio, SEC This Morning. We've had Chris Doering, we've had Peter Burns, we've had Hester, the whole team. Now we get the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Frank Fowler. Frank, what's up, man?
My man, it's good to be on with you, dude. It's been awesome to watch you build your podcasting empire into what it's becoming. So I do remember in the beginning when you were just doing this and it was kind of, slowly building up, and now you got the studio with like 6 monitors in there, all these helmets, people are downloading like crazy. So the growth has been unbelievable to watch, dude. So pumped to see you rising up the charts like you have been.
Well, I appreciate it, man. I'm trying to get like you. And Frank, one thing kind of off topic, but man, you would have the best like mafia name. Like it'd be like Frankie Four Fingers Fowler. Yeah. Like it's just perfect. Yeah. It's just perfect, man. But no, I'm excited to get you on here. We got to do this. So we're going to do this a lot more. And I know we're in the off season in summer, kind of in the grind days, but there's a lot of stuff going on. And in my monologue, Frank, I talked about this Georgia Clemson matchup, which is going to be one of the best matchups of the whole season, let alone week one. I love that they're playing it. I hate they're playing on a neutral site. One of my Jake's takes is I can't stand that outside of bowl games. I think it's what makes the college game great. But when you look at this, and before I get your answer, I just want to kind of put it in the terms that I put it so you understand the context. When I say make or break, if Georgia loses this game against Clemson, they almost have to beat Bama in what's probably going to be the SEC championship game. And I hate looking down the road like that. But if they beat Clemson, now you're pretty much in if you're Georgia, unless you stumble along the way to the SEC championship game. Kind of how do you see this first game, Georgia-Clemson, and the importance of it in the long term for Georgia?
It's an important game for them throughout the entire year because it's really going to dictate the mindset in that locker room for the rest of the season. Yeah. Expectations are so high for them right now. And it's, really warranted when you look at the talent that they have on both sides of the ball. And when you break down the matchup and you look at everything, I am a little skeptical with the win totals that I see for them, the expectations. And it's not because I don't think that they have the talent to do it. It's you look at their past history and how they've done in clutch moments. And, hopefully they can change the script and revise history a little bit and make it be known that they are capable of coming through in the biggest moments. But for right now, I have my skepticisms about it. And so, if they lose that game, yeah, it's going to be tough for them, really throughout the rest of the season because there's no easy game in the SEC on a weekly basis. We know that, and they are going to have to beat Alabama in the SEC championship, like you said. But you also are dealing with something that is really important for this team when you consider what they have, and that's tempo and a mindset. And you cannot start the year off with a loss like that against a team that you think you're capable of beating, and then, that you may see eventually down the road again in the CFPP. Yeah. So it's tough, man. They got to win that game, not just for their own playoff chances, but I think it really dictates the entire tempo for the season.
No, I agree. And momentum's a real thing. I've said the same thing about Florida. You look at the way Florida ended last year, not that they have the capability, I think, of Georgia, but they better start off good because we know that the chirping that's gone on from Georgia, even all the success they've had, Georgia fans want a national championship. And when you look at this matchup, Clemson returns basically everything on defense outside of Darian Kendrick, who just happened to transfer to Georgia. You look at Justin Ross coming back. I look at these two rosters, and I do think Georgia has the advantage. And we're a long way out. A lot of things can happen, Frank, up to the point. But how do you kind of think that game's going to play out just from looking outside in this far out?
I'm a little skeptical about Georgia's offensive weapons in terms of receiver. I think it's really going to hurt not having George Pickens. I think that's going to be a huge, and there's been rumors that he may be able to, come back at some point and get this going. But, quite honestly, I don't know. I think that JT Daniels looks stellar down the end of the stretch of the season. He looked really good. They have the depth at running back. But, it's funny, too, when you look at Clemson and Alabama, because it's like, it all kind of hinges on what they're going to get from these quarterbacks that we think are going to be good and we think are going to be able to succeed at this level, right? But we still don't really know that much about DJ Uiagalelei, and we still don't really know that much about Bryce Young. So there's some question marks that are surrounding Clemson right now in terms of that. But they do have a lot of guys coming back, like you said. The talent is there. They've came through in the big moments and proven that they are winners. I do think that Georgia wins this game. I don't know by how much at this point. I think there's still going to be some things to get dictated in the summer. I think it's way too early to look at spreads for that. I think it's going to be tough. But I think you consider what they have on defense, and then you look at all the weapons that JT Daniels has. That's probably where Clemson has the advantage. But I do think that, Daniels did look like one of the best quarterbacks in college football down the stretch last season. And so I'm going to put my trust in that. Now, whether it lasts an entire season, I don't know, but it does help them. I think that this is an early game in the year, and they can kind of carry over some of the positive momentum they had down the stretch of last season when they beat Cincinnati.
Yeah. And again, I think that the best rapport, the two quarterbacks or systems that have the best rapport with the OC are Ole Miss and Georgia. I think Todd Monken and JT Daniels have such a good relationship, and he's got to stay healthy. I don't think enough people, and you don't wish injuries and stuff, but it's a real thing because when you do have a quarterback like that, there's a big drop off. And listen, you can say what you want about Carson Beck. He's not JT Daniels, and he didn't do the things that he did. And when I'm thinking about playing this game, in my mind, I want to take the over. Whatever it is, I want to take the over, but Danny Sheridan gave me a hint. When you have two explosive offenses playing, take the under. So I haven't put my pick out yet. I'm going back and forth, but I want to stay in the East, Frank. A lot of storylines in the West. Seems like in the East, all we're talking about is Georgia, and then there's everybody else. But I think there's a huge storyline because I don't believe in Florida this year. I don't. You look defensively, there's a ton of pressure on them. I don't know if they're going to make a huge jump this year defensively as opposed to what they did last year, which they were anemic compared to what Florida usually does defensively. But even though Dan Mullen's a great play caller, they lost so many weapons on offense. I'm really looking at Kentucky or Missouri to finish second in the East. I have Kentucky finishing second in the East. They just added Jaquez Jones, a linebacker transfer from Ole Miss, to add just another weapon to that defense. How do you see the rest of the East playing out? And do you see Florida kind of taking a step back? I talk about this all the time, but I think it's a fascinating storyline. Yeah,
I do think Florida's going to take a step back. Absolutely. And I'm very much with you in terms of Kentucky finishing second. People, they listen to our show or they know me will say that I'm being a little biased because I'm a Kentucky grad. I love my Cats, but I'm looking at what they have on paper, and the Jaquez Jones, to me, addition last week was huge. Mm-hmm. It's massive because that's a guy that had 75 tackles last season for Ole Miss in the SEC West. He was one of their best defensive players. And he had options. He could go where he wanted to go, but he wanted to go to Kentucky because he believes in their potential to compete in the SEC East. So there's actually a lot of things about their roster that I'm excited about. I'm very excited to watch Liam Cohen take over. I think he's going to bring a fascinating NFL kind of West Coast style approach to his offense. And we're still not really sure who's going to start a quarterback for them, but it doesn't really matter because they have so much talent coming back across the offensive line. It's been unbelievable to watch them develop offensive linemen over the last 4 or 5 years. And they have so much talent coming back. That was one of the bigger things that I was surprised about, actually, when I was looking at, just kind of who was going to go to the draft from Kentucky and who wasn't. And they had a lot of linemen return. And I think that, for them to do that, that shows that they believe in their potential to go far this year. You don't just kind of leave because you think you might be able to go to the league. But if you could stay one more year and raise your stock up, you're going to do that. And that's what they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And then so I was very excited to see all the guys that came back on the offensive line. They got some really good defensive pieces coming back. And I believe that Mark Stoops is one of the best talent developers in the country. I think that, he prides himself on building more with less. And that's what makes him so unique is he loves having a chip on his shoulder. He loves when people doubt him. And you'll see that when you go to media days this year. He's going to be there. He's going to be fired up because I'm sure a lot of these blogs and these people that watch, football, they don't really still pay enough attention to Kentucky. I don't understand that at this point, but they kind of write them off and don't do their homework, are going to come in there with some baloney type win total and have them losing a bunch of games that they should be favored in. He's going to be upset about it. And that's good because he brings that fire and that momentum into the season and it carries over. Mm-hmm. And so that's why he's such a good coach, because his personality is infectious. He gets people going. And, I love what he's built in Lexington. I truly think that his value to that school is so high. But I love what they have coming back on both sides of the ball. So I agree with you. I think that they're going to be fine. It was good to see that all these guys that could have gone to the league said, you know what, I want to come back to Kentucky one more time because I have, a chance, not only, like I said, to raise my stock, but to do something special. The Missouri thing is interesting. I am really excited to watch what Connor Bazelak does. Yeah. And Eli Drinkwitz has become really, I think, one of our favorite coaches on the show because he's one of the more relatable guys in the conference already. And it's crazy because he's only been there for a year, but he did so many things on and off the field last year in terms of just being a leader and setting the tone. They have some pieces, I think, on defense that are going to be, the middle of the defense is a big concern. The middle of the defense needs some work. I'm with you there. I do think bringing in Steve Wilks is huge. Yep. A guy who has a ton of NFL experience. And I think that he'll hopefully be able to figure out a way to work with what he has and kind of cover up some of those holes like you mentioned. But Bazelak potential, to me, is through the roof. I actually think he's a top 5 quarterback in the conference coming into the season. I really do. He lit up Kentucky last year when they played. Now, I think, if they played each other tomorrow, I think Kentucky would beat them because of all the guys that they had coming back. That's how high I am on them. But Missouri's going to be right there, too. They're going to be competitive.
Yeah, that week 2 matchup, Kentucky versus Missouri, I never thought I'd say this in college football, is going to have some implications for later on in the season. I'm a big Eli Drinkwitz fan. I think Eli's really himself. I think some guys fake it. There's a few guys I'm not going to name on here that I think fake it. Eli's not one of them. And excited to see. And then his offensive mind, he's Dr. Seuss when it comes to formations and motions and stuff like that. So it's going to be fun to watch. And before we get to the West, and I'm actually going to throw some college baseball in here before, but looking at South Carolina and Tennessee and Vanderbilt, you have new hires. I like to talk about it a lot going into the year. Expectations at Tennessee, we know it's going to be super high, but they got that NCAA cloud over them. When you look at the SEC East hires, can you rank them for me? I know Vandy may be a little bit, tough with what Clark's inheriting, but what do you think about those 3 and who do you see making a move?
So between Heupel, Clark Lee, and Shane Beamer. Yep. I saw your thing that you put out on Twitter about how you have Beamer above Heupel. I think it's hard to rank Clark Lee and Shane Beamer above Heupel right now because they don't have any experience doing this, and they're coming into the most competitive conference in the world right now. I'm still going to give Heupel the nod because he's got experience. And I think that's that's the fairest way to do this. I don't think it's fair to take a bunch of coordinators that have done really well and have killed it, at Oklahoma, at Notre Dame, and have done great things to deserve the opportunities they're getting now. But I don't know, man. I can't put a coordinator that hasn't done it yet above a guy who had some success at UCF. And I know, and you brought this up to me too on Twitter, that the fan base was starting to get a little upset with him. And I understand that, but it's not like he went there and really kind of, didn't have some success. He did fine. So I think he's got to get the top spot for right now. I'd say Shane Beamer 2, Clark Lee 3. That's where I would put them.
Yeah. And look, there's logical, arguments on both sides. And really looking at it, the reason I did that was twofold. One, because of what you just mentioned. I mean, UCF was on a downward trend. I mean, it went from okay to bad to 8-5 to one more year of average, because they don't expect average at UCF now. Thanks, Scott Frost, for that. That's one reason. And look, Shane Beamer hasn't been a head coach. I understand that. Clark Lee hasn't been a head coach. But the biggest reason I did that is because it's coming. The NCAA is coming. And they're going to hammer them. It's going to be postseason. It's going to be scholarships. And Josh Heupel could be Nostradamus, but there's no way to have success in this league right now with your hands tied behind your back. And that's what's going to happen. I hate to hurt Tennessee's fans' feeling. I know they're super high because of baseball right now. Enjoy it. Enjoy Omaha because they're coming. The NCAA is coming, and it's not going to be pretty. We all know how that ended with Jeremy Pruitt. But that's why we have these preseason rankings. It's going to be interesting to see. South Carolina's roster is such a big rebuild too. I don't think people realize, outside of Shi Smith and Kevin Harris and a couple guys on defense, really how depleted that roster is, even though Will Muschamp was there. But I do, before we get to the West, want to give a shout out, Dynasty U. If you're trying to get your kid recruited, Prospect Guardian, doesn't matter. If you're trying to get them in front of the eyes of a college coach, instead of sending a million emails that I promise you after the first one they're not going to read or kick off to some kid in the recruiting department that they're going to file in a different place and never look at it, you need to download the Dynasty U app right now. It's the LinkedIn for recruits. It's got everything, GPA, social media. It's all in one place. College coaches love it because it's concise. They can get through it. It doesn't guarantee you a scholarship, but it guarantees you the chance for them to see you. The tape and the grades don't lie. Download Dynasty U today from the Google Play Store, anywhere you get your apps, and it's free. Get it while it lasts. But we're here with producer for SiriusXM SEC Radio, Frank Fowler. And Frank, I want to get to the West. A ton of storylines there, but a little college baseball. And, in my solo show I released a couple days ago, whatever, a little bit disappointing for the SEC right now going into the College World Series. Still yet to see what Mississippi State's going to do against Notre Dame. It should be a tough game there, but Arkansas, number 1 seed, goes down. Florida goes down in the regional. I mean, Ole Miss gets destroyed in game 3. The SEC may only get 3 teams, possibly 2, into Omaha. What do you kind of think? I know baseball's weird, but what do you think about that, Frank?
I'm with you in the sense that it's a disappointment. And the biggest reason it is because Arkansas is not going there.
Yep.
That's the hardest part about this, I think. If Arkansas was going and, you know, you were still able to get Vanderbilt maybe in and throw in another team like Mississippi State and you have 3, the disappointment factor to me is less because Arkansas had so many things to celebrate this year. It was one of the more just tremendous rosters I've seen in college baseball in a long, long time. And Dave Van Horn did an incredible job managing that roster. And I think that the thing about him that was so unique is he knew he was going to have a lot of talent this year because of COVID and everything that happened. He knew that it was going to be one of those things where he had some guys that were good enough to start if the roster wasn't so loaded, but they weren't going to be on the field because of the guys that they had coming back. So I loved what he did in terms of managing it. And he came on the show a couple of times and always talked about how, you know, he tried not to work his guys too hard during the season because they had been off. He's trying to, you know, make sure their stamina is okay down the stretch. Everything was put in place for them to make a run to go to Omaha. And then for them to lose to North Carolina State, it's like, man, it was a blow. I'm bummed for them. I'm bad for Kevin Cobbs. I one of the storyline guys of all of college baseball that was so fun to watch. So that's the part that hurts. It would have been nice for LSU and Paul Mainieri to make it there on his last run. I don't think that they had enough talent though. And so I wasn't particularly surprised that they didn't make it. I think it was actually, you know, pretty admirable that he took that roster all the way to the super regionals when you consider all the guys that they lost earlier in the year due to injury. So like they didn't have Jaden Hill. So that part was hard. Mississippi, Ole Miss, you know, I'm a little bummed about that too. They got smoked last night. I mean, they let 16 runs, I think is how many that they allowed. So that part of it was hard too. They had enough talent to go far, but I would say this, if you're a little discouraged by what's going on within the SEC right now, just, you know, hopefully, like you said, Mississippi State can win tonight, but the 2 teams that we have in there right now, you have one team in Tennessee that is so exciting and fun to watch. They're such a great team. And Vitello is like everything that college baseball needs right now. You know, he goes against the grain, doesn't really care as much about like some of the unwritten rules. Like he loves to just, you know, go into the stands and get the fans going. And he's brought a spark of energy to college baseball that not that it wasn't exciting before, but anytime you can bring in a guy like that, it's just a complete electric factory. It's like, I love it. And then Vanderbilt, you know, Tim Corbin is one of the best coaches in all of college sports. It's not just baseball. I mean, the guy on and off the field is an intellectual genius. He's incredibly valuable to that university. He may be, honestly, outside of like Saban in Alabama, I would put him in that same category of like guys that, you know, have an infinite amount of value to their school, right? Tim Corbin's got that value for Vanderbilt. And you see why. I mean, they continue to succeed year after year after year. I love watching Kumar Rocker. The guy, we've been watching him for a little while now, and he's been just a complete, you know, joy to go out there and see how he does. So I'm going to be interested to see how they do. I think they have enough depth across their entire rotation to go far. It's just going to be interesting to see if they can get it from their lineup. But yeah, I'm with you though. A little bit of a disappointment, but don't be discouraged. The 2 teams that are in there as of now, and hopefully it's 3, are still a lot of fun to watch.
So the state of Tennessee right now is repping really hard. You got Vandy in, you got Tennessee in. I hope they put them on opposite sides of the bracket, which they won't. But if they are the only 2 teams, I would love to see that College World Series final matchup. And Tennessee, look, no fan base deserves this more than Tennessee, in my opinion. With the crap that they've had to put up with in football, basketball has had really good regular seasons, then tend to fall apart in the NCAA tournament. They needed this, and I'm happy for them. Like you said, Coach V is huge, and he's about to make a lot of money because they're going to try and lock him up in Knoxville. If there's any water by the baseball stadium, they may just need to take the Vol Navy and put him there over there. But no, Frank, it's a great point. Very interested to see how this winds up. And baseball is such a crazy sport. It's hard to sit here and try and broadcast or project what's going to happen in a game that can be individually taken over. But Frank, I want to talk about the SEC West too while I have you here. Looking at Alabama, let's start there. You mentioned Bryce Young. Is Bryce Young the heir apparent? Do you think Bryce Young is going to be the next superstar at Alabama? Because asking him to try and do what they did last year offensively with what they lost is going to be a little too much in my opinion, but he has a chance to be a hell of a player.
He does. But you know what, though? And it's like in situations like this, most of the time, it's so hard to say basically how we have no idea how he's going to be. I mean, he crushed it in the spring game. He looks great. We heard some really good things about how he was performing in spring practice. The tools are all there. He's got everything that you would want in terms of being able to move outside the pocket. I hate doing this with guys that we don't have a sample size for.
It's tough.
I hate
it's tough.
You know, it's really hard. I'd give him the benefit of the doubt, though, because he's got the greatest coach maybe in the history of sports that's going to be directing him and telling him what to do. So, you know, if you're worried about the learning curve with him, at least, you know, you have him kind of leading the charge. I think in most cases, it would be really hard to put a prediction on a kid like him at any other school. But because he's at Alabama, because he has Nick Saban there, because he has so many guys that are on that staff that not only have experience coaching in college, but, you know, across the league in the NFL, Doug Marrone, Bill O'Brien, all those guys that are there now, they can literally just pull him aside. You know, I know they coach different positions, but it's like they have seen so much during their time. Yeah, I think he's going to have a good season. Is he going to be the real deal? That remains to be seen. I don't know, but I do think that he's going to be able to go out there and march them to at least 10 wins. But it's also a product of having all the guys that are on the field with him, right? You know, that's the part of it that you have to remember, is that they have so many guys that just bring in a ton of excitement, and it really at the wide receiver position especially. I mean, that's the part that like they're going to be loaded there again. So I'm pumped to see what they do. I really am. Yeah. Because you know what, I hate the people that are just saying, you know, Alabama's bad for college football, and enjoy this while we have it. I'm telling you right now, because there are certain dynasties or figures in sports that have a grasp on what they do, and they run the table and they do amazing, and then they kind of fade off and you don't see it anymore. But you think back and you're like, man, like, why did I hate on these programs so much? Just because they were successful. I mean, they didn't really do anything wrong. It's like
human nature.
It's human nature, you know, but we think about like the Patriots and the way that they were doing everything up there with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. And now he goes to Tampa Bay and wins. It's like, why were we so, I know that they had all the stuff that happened with cheating, but it's like, you know, it's success, man. Like it's success. You should appreciate success. And so enjoy this while we can, because Alabama's not going to be this good forever, but we have the greatest figure in the history of college athletics leading the charge, and you should just embrace that and enjoy it and appreciate it, because that's what I'm saying. So I'm pumped. I can't wait to see what they do.
Yeah, and my biggest question on Bryce Young is an ability. We know how talented he is. It's how much are they going to run him? You know, because he's not Jalen Hurts. He's not big and bulky and can take hits. He's not frail, but you know, if you square him up a couple times, it'd be interesting, because if you look at Paul Tyson behind him, that's a totally different type of quarterback. That's a totally different way you call plays and a totally different way that you defend them. So I'm interested to see how Bill O'Brien and Nick Saban and them walk that line there. But, you know, and it's funny. Real quick on the Arkansas baseball thing. To me, it's almost like you become an astronaut and they slotted you like, listen, 2025, you're going in the shuttle, baby. You're going to spacewalk. This is your time. You do all the training, do all the work, and literally the week of you get the flu or something like that. You got to set it. I almost feel like getting left to the altar, but just wanted to throw that in. But, you know, I'm very interested to watch this Alabama team. I think they're going to smack Miami in week 1, regardless if they played them on Neptune. I just don't think Miami, just looking at them defensively, I know Alabama's replaced a lot on the offensive line, but they replaced them with some pretty damn good players, and a lot of them early enrolled. But looking at the rest of the West, you know, people talk about LSU and A&M, and while we still have time for the portal, there's a couple teams. You look at Ole Miss, but if Auburn could add a tackle or another wide receiver, you know, wide receiver just hit the portal from a pretty elite team in the SEC. If Auburn adds an offensive tackle or two and a receiver, I think they could sneak up on some people. What do you kind of look at the rest of the SEC West? Because Bo Nix is either going to be really good or really bad. I think it's going to be one of the two. Yeah.
Well, are you convinced that Bo Nix is going to start?
Hell yeah. I'd be willing to put the rent on it. Hey, TJ, here's the thing. And I always say this. They signed TJ Finley for the roster because in between Bo Nix and a true freshman Demetrius Davis, there's nobody that can help you. And those two guys are way too wide in classes in that gap because, Frank, it's not just about this year and you never know what could happen. Bo Nix could get hurt. He could play bad, whatever. But next year, if Bo Nix leaves or something like that, you got to have a guy that can come in and be ready. And TJ Finley, he's a sophomore. He fits right into that roster. But it's going to push Bo Nix, but I think he'll be the starter. Go ahead.
Okay. I would tend to agree with you, but I think that Finley does have some experience, especially playing the SEC. That's kind of value that you can't really put a price on. And obviously Bo has that too, but I think he'll push him in the summer. The thing with A&M that's going to be interesting is we don't really know who's going to be taking over at quarterback, but they do have a lot of talent that's returning on both sides of the ball. I think the thing though that is so interesting about the SEC West, there's one guy there that the world does not talk about enough. And maybe they will as we get to like week 3 or week 4, but the best quarterback in the SEC plays at Ole Miss. And Matt Corral is, I think, going to have a monster season. Ole Miss was putrid on defense last year. Awful. And they've got a million things to work on this summer, a million things. But all the guys that are coming back that are on that team, Jerrion Ealy, Snoop Connor, I don't know what they're going to do with John Rice Plumlee. I guess we'll figure that out.
Braylon Sanders is another guy.
Braylon Sanders is going to be a stud. But you have the best quarterback in the conference right there who's got incredible arm strength, and his decision-making got better too, I think, a little bit down the stretch. I think people were a little bit concerned about some of the interceptions that he threw, but to me, that's a learning thing. That's a growing thing. I thought he got better down the stretch of the season. I thought he improved. To me right now, I think if they can fix their defensive issues, they're the second best team in the conference. I'm the second best team in the SEC West, I should say. Okay. Second best team in the SEC West because of their firepower. Now, let me ask you this. I mean, I know you're high on Lane with your rankings. I mean, do you agree with that? I mean,
the way I look at it is like this, and I look at the schedule, and I think they're going to win a couple games that they shouldn't. I think they're going to outscore some people. I just still think they're so far away defensively. And I know watching the spring game, they had some of the starters last year as backups. But at some point, you got to get a couple stops. And I just don't know if throughout the course of the season, I'm not talking about one game, Frank, anything can happen in one game. But if you look at the attrition that naturally happens on a defense throughout the year up front, I just still think Ole Miss is a year away from just having the bodies to be able to do it. But they're going to win some games they shouldn't. I've got it Alabama, LSU and A&M, and then Auburn and Ole Miss kind of in that area. I'm really interested. I'm going to ask you about LSU in a second. But I don't think you can ever sleep on Lane Kiffin. And no longer is Ole Miss a cakewalk. No longer is it a cakewalk. And I say it, Matt Corral is the best quarterback in the SEC. I agree. Yeah,
100%. And those tiers that you just mentioned are fair. But I would say that I don't think there's a huge gap between A&M and Ole Miss or LSU and Auburn. That's the thing. It's like, I don't think that it's like that wide. I think you could maybe make the argument that A&M could be a little bit better than Ole Miss will be because, they do have a lot of guys coming back on defense. One of the best defensive coordinators in the country, Mike
Led
Elko.
the SEC in defense last year.
I mean, who knows how long he's going to be in College Station. At some point, he's going to get a head coaching job. I know he gets paid a king's ransom to be the DC there, but somebody will hire him to lead their program because he's a hell of a coach. But I don't know, man. You're right. It is a lot of things to fix in terms of defense for Ole Miss, but I do think that if they can just figure out, they were so bad on third down. I mean, they were just awful.
Horrible.
Yeah. Right. I mean, just literally just horrendous. And so, but to me, that I think Lane's got to look at that and say, this isn't acceptable. And I don't know, what they're planning on doing in terms of their secondary. I mean, the secondary was awful. What the pieces that they're going to do to fix, this is going to be an incredibly important summer for them. But I'll go back to what I asked you. Do you think the gap between, A&M and Auburn and LSU is like that wide? Because I don't. I really don't think it's that big.
So when I look at A&M, I think they are the second best team in the SEC up front on both sides of the ball. I look at Auburn on the offensive line. They have no tackles. They are trying to find a tackle right now. They've had play with more guards than the Houston Rockets. Brodarius Ham is a guard. Alec Jackson hadn't been very good. The two JUCO guys haven't really done anything. And defensively, they lost Jeremiah Wright. They've added Tony Fair from UAB. I think they're going to be a lot better on the defensive line than they were last year. I thought they were horrible on the defensive line last year. But looking at A&M, I think there's a huge gap between Auburn and A&M. When I look at LSU, I think the gap up front is closer between LSU and A&M than it is between Auburn and A&M. Because, look, we can go over skill players. I can find skill players in the Sun Belt that can come in here right now and play in the SEC, but it's going to come down to up front. That's where the gap to me is. And in all actuality, I think that's the biggest gap between where Georgia and Alabama is outside of everybody else except A&M. I mean, look at Ford on the defensive line. So that's my argument there. But from outside of the lines, you could say that. But again, I'm talking about the whole season, not just one game. That's not saying Ole Miss could, and I know, I just want to clarify for our audience. Ole Miss could beat A&M heads up for one game. They could outscore them. Because here's what teams can't do against Ole Miss and defense like that. You can't turn the ball over. If you don't turn the ball over against Ole Miss, you're going to score 35 to 40 points. And you're going to, hopefully Matt Corral has one of those games last year where he throws like 5 interceptions. It was rare as hell. He much better chance throwing 5 touchdowns than 5 interceptions. But I just think the gap up front is so big, Frank. And that's the race in recruiting. That is the race to get guys up front. Also, too, I would say this, J-Boy, we haven't even mentioned Arkansas once in the conversation. And they had I talked about all the returning talent that came back at Kentucky. It was even more at Arkansas, the guys that came back that wanted to be there. And Sam Pittman did a really nice job in his first season in Fayetteville. I was so impressed with what he did. And, you look at what happens in Starkville come year 2 with Mike Leach. There is usually a pretty big jump. I don't know if it's going to be as big as it's been in the past with him, but I do think that they're going to improve. This might be the most fascinating year that the West has had in a long time. It's wild.
I would say that because, you look across the board and they're like, you knew Alabama was going to be good because Mac Jones had enough experience that you figured he was going to be able to go in and at least manage it. I don't think anybody expected him to have the year that he had. No. But there were so many guys coming back that you knew were just bona fide stars, right? Devontae, Jalen Waddle, all these guys. Najee. I mean, just everybody, dude, that you knew was, going to be so fun to watch every single week. But now you look across the board, LSU, you have no idea who's going to start a quarterback. There's been all these guys that have left. Eric Gilbert leaves. All the guys on defense that left to go to other schools, or some of the guys that got drafted. Auburn, new head coach. You have no idea what that's going to look like. I think Brian Harson's going to be fine. I think he's going to be good, but we don't know. I mean, it's a big deal to come down here to the SEC from where he was. I mean, Boise State, good program. He did a good job, but 2 very different things. And you're also coaching at a school that's got, maybe the biggest hot seat ever when you walk in, because the fan base is so upset and ticked off that they haven't really been competitive with Alabama as much as they'd like to be. And so you already walk in with an incredible amount of pressure from boosters and alumni and all these people. Mississippi State, like I said, you don't know what Mike Leach is going to do. But then, A&M, like, what are they going to get a quarterback? So, all these things that you look at make this for, I think, quite possibly one of the more interesting SEC West buildups that we've seen in a long time. It's way more interesting than the East is, because outside of Kentucky and Missouri, I think the rest of the other programs are going to struggle. Maybe Florida, we'll see what happens with them. But Georgia just kind of being that like clear favorite. The West to me is way more interesting than the East. I just, I was just thinking about this as we're talking about this, like 3 programs we didn't even mention in that category. You know what I mean? Yeah. Well, I mean, you look at the West, where's the off week? Where's the off? I mean, it ain't Mike Leach, and you got to get ready for that. Now, I do think he has to. People have been saying this for 100 years. I think Mike Leach has to run the ball a little bit more outside of the smoke draw. And I'm going to tell you this, Frank. I'm going to ask for a bold prediction from you in a second, but I'm going to make one right here. I think there's more pressure right now on Brian Harsin to beat Georgia than there is to beat Alabama, just from the natural pulse. Auburn. Let's see. I think Malzahn was 2-8 against Georgia in the last 10 times. That to me is what got him let go. And people outside of, I think, Auburn and Georgia maybe don't realize the vitriol in that rivalry as much. Now, it's not as much as Alabama because it's in state, but that's one he has got to win. He's got to, because it affects recruiting and everything like that. But it's a great point you bring up, Frank. Give me, before I let you go, I'm going to let you plug where you're at on social media. And we got to do this again, brother. I knew it was going to be fun. But, give me one bold prediction you have
for SEC football this season?
Oof, man. I only say that because there's like 5 that immediately come to mind. I know I kind of sounded high on Ole Miss, and I brought them up, and I think that the thing with Kentucky is going to be interesting to watch too. I think that Missouri is going to turn some heads, and I would not be stunned if they won at least 9 games.
Wow.
I think I wouldn't be stunned. It's a bold prediction, but I think Connor Bazelak is such a good player and brings back such a, the experience that he got in his year with Eli in his first year. I'm excited to see what they can do. I would not be shocked if it was, at maybe 8 wins. I think that's fair. 9 wins. I mean, we're going to see, but I believe in Eli Drinkwitz so much and love what he's building there in terms of culture. And I think that the guys that are going there right now that you're seeing from the portal love it. And they love the excitement that's being there. So I think that's a little under the radar story that people need to pay attention to. I never like to really make these predictions about, the blue bloods of the conference that everybody follows religiously, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, because, you're going to get what get what you see there. There are some under the radar storylines that happen across the conference. I got to tell you guys, that don't have to do with Florida and Georgia and LSU. So pay attention to Missouri this year. I think they're going to be good.
Definitely. Well, Frank, man, it's great stuff. Tell everybody where they can find you on social media and where they can catch you on SEC XM there on Sirius.
Yeah, man. My Twitter account is Frank Fowler SEC, and we are on Sirius XM SEC Radio Channel 374 every day, Monday through Friday, 8 to 11 a.m. Eastern. That's where we are. And, the channel is really good. We also got an afternoon show that goes from 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern that Chris Childers hosts. And, the morning show is obviously the one that I produce with Peter Burns and Chris Doring. And we had a lot of guys that fill in too that are really talented, that have done a great job. Cole Kublik, Aaron Murray, Max Starks, guys that bring a ton of insight and really good analysis that I don't think you're going to find anywhere else. And we break down every program in the conference. We don't just talk about, Alabama, LSU, Texas A&M. We'll talk about South Carolina. We'll talk about Kentucky. We'll talk about Missouri. We'll talk about Vanderbilt. We'll talk about the guys that are doing some really exciting things that are going under the radar that deserve to be mentioned on the channel. And that's one of the things that I've been most proud of. So we cover all 14 teams, my man.
Definitely, man. I echo that. We try to mix it up here too. But Frank, I appreciate having you on. We'll do this again. I appreciate you guys joining us. Subscribe, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I appreciate y'all. The download numbers have been crazy, and we're only getting started. It's only the summer. Also, go to thejboyshow.com. Grab some of the merch, whether it's the gray hoodie, the black hoodie, it doesn't matter. We'll catch you next time for another edition of the J-Boy Show. The J-Boy's going, gone.
The J-Boy Show is produced by David Cohn, Technical Director Dave Hammock, Creative Director David Culbertson, Audio Engineer Faison Sharif, Production Assistants Blaine Crane and Kyle Orr, Executive Producers Jake Crane, Vince Thompson, Steve Chamberlain, and David Cohn. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, thejboyshow.com, for updates regarding our newest apparel and merch designs. Win the water cooler with The J-Boy Show.